CNN has learned President Trump is expected to speak about the deadly violence in Charlottesville again today. So far, the president has kept his comments vague. Mike Pence, the vice president who's traveling overseas, is calling out the hate groups by name.
We have no tolerance for hate and violence from white supremacists, neo-Nazis, or the KKK.
Why didn't the president say that? Will he say it today? And if he does, is it too late? Former Virginia Attorney General Kenneth Cuccinelli and CNN political commentator Symone D. Sanders are with us today. It's good to have you. So let's talk about timing and impact. Symone Sanders, if the president comes out today and says, of course I meant the KKK and neo-Nazis and white supremacists, of course I condemn them, is there satisfaction in that?
Look, I think if the president comes out today and says those words, uses the term white supremacists, KKK, white nationalists, neo-Nazis, I think his problems will not completely go away, but the tide will begin to turn. Look, words matter and actions matter as well. And so then folks will be looking for the president of the United States and this administration to take additional concrete actions. We know the DOJ has already said that they are going to investigate what happened. I would propose that Steve Bannon and Gorka also need to be looked at, and the president might need to make some changes with his staff. So we need to, I guess, wait to see what the president is going to say, and I'm cautiously optimistic, Chris.
Ken, what's your sense as to where this statement came from, this original many sides statement? We just heard from the AG this morning, Jeff Sessions, when he was asked whether or not there should be any equivalence drawn between the KKK and the people who were down there protesting against the KKK, and he said absolutely not.
Right, and I certainly agree with the Attorney General. It sounded like when you read the whole statement by the president, the written statement was very good, and this looked like one of those kind of off-script editions that he does so often, and he's gotten himself in some trouble with it, I think. I would note, you said there are actions and words. The most important action taken so far was almost at midnight Saturday when once it had been known that the driver had crossed state lines, presumably that was an important factor. The Department of Justice announced that they were going to proceed with a civil rights investigation. This is in the Western District of Virginia. Rick Montcastle's the U.S. attorney there. He is not a political appointee. He is a 20-year professional. Worked with him when I was Attorney General of Virginia. So this is in very good hands. The actions are all good and are essentially everything the federal government can do. Turning to the words, I would expect to hear stronger language like we heard from the Vice President coming out of the President as we get here into the beginning of the business week. And I think there's every reason to expect that. I think some of the aspersions cast on people like Steve Bannon are really outrageous. I think that's people using a situation to try to paste somebody they'd like to lay a glove on.
I would disagree.
But the president here, disagree. The president needs to take stronger steps here as the week goes on and these words progress.
All right, Ken, Symone, what is your disagreement?
I disagree because Steve Bannon when he was over Breitbart just a year ago, he said he was proud that Breitbart was the platform of the alt-right. The alt-right is nothing but white supremacy and khaki. Steve Bannon has been a curator of the alt-right. You played audio from Sebastian Gorka just moments ago on your show where he basically said it's not the white supremacists, look at these brown people in the Middle East. And so it's not aspersions that have been cast onto these individuals. These are words that these folks have used. White supremacist sympathizers are seemingly advising the president of the United States. And that is jarring and concerning to me. This is the people's house. The white supremacy has no place in our administration.
Ken, what's your sense of...
Yeah, I certainly agree with that.
What's your sense, Ken,
Go ahead, Chris,
of where it came from? Just think about it. If, God forbid you were ever in that situation and you bring your advisors around you and they say, all right, here's what's going on. The KKK went to march because they're upset about the Robert E. Lee statue coming down, but, it got out of control and this kid flew in with a car and somebody's dead now. And where would the idea of, but let's be measured. Let's say that everybody's wrong here. Let's not call out the KKK by name. Let's not do that. Who says that? Like, where does that idea come from in your mind? And if that is a Bannon, if that is a Miller, if that is a Gorka, how do you insulate them from criticism for helping a president arrive at that kind of conclusion?
Well, I don't know anything about Gorka. I know about Steve Bannon, and I just disagree with the comments made about him. But I think that you expect presidents to start, even in serious situations, fairly measured, expressing concern for the people injured, and then working your way through. Because remember, he's on top of the prosecution that happens with a civil rights investigation. If you look back to the shooting in South Carolina, the tragedy where you had Dylan Roof shooting in a black church, President Obama's initial comments were much more measured than as he went on days later. And it was a very appropriate escalation by the President, Obama I'm talking about. And I think that we should reasonably expect to see that
Ken,
here
I don't
with
think it's sized
President
up like this. And the President took a long time. Hold on, Simone. The President took a long time here. It wasn't like as the violence was unfolding, the President came out in one regard about let's make sure it stops and let's let the police do their job and find out what's going on. They had a long time here to figure out what it was. He knew what the conditions were on the ground when he spoke to it. He just didn't use the words. He said on many sides, Ken, and if you want to defend Bannon, I think you got to put some meat on the bones because, you know, his outlet, Breitbart, was deafening in its silence in how it covered Charlotte. You know, this is not a place that's shy about getting after things when they're controversial, but they didn't get after this. And Bannon does have a history. He did say it was the home for the alt-right, and that matters, Ken.
Right, but whatever you want to assign to him, you certainly can't assign what Breitbart is doing now while he's not there.
No. We're assigning what Breitbart previously did.
So, you know, look, one of the problems with these hate groups like this is they assume mantles that start to pollute everything around it and everything that it touches. And understandably, for people who are part of that, that's the case. But look, they're white supremacists, there were neo-Nazis, this all turned violent, and frankly, I think they wanted it to turn violent. I think they wanted the kind of attention they're getting now. That was
how white
part
supremacists
of
operate,
their
yes.
hopes. And that's right, and look at how many people were there. There were about 1,000 people, if police estimates are right, that came from all over the country to participate in this, and there were far more than that protesting, objecting, etc. And I think that's more representational of America. It certainly is of Virginia. And as you notice with the arrests that were made, most of them were from out of state. Right. There's only one Virginian arrested.
So, Simone, go ahead.
This was attracting trash from all over the place.
Let me be clear. Let me be very clear. What happened Friday, Saturday in Charlottesville was a direct result of folks being upset that a statue, a monument of the Confederacy was going to come down. When President Trump took the podium on Saturday, a woman was dead. She was murdered by white supremacists, neo-Nazis. He did not use those words, that terminology. You have white supremacist, neo-Nazi sympathizers apparently in the White House, and Sebastian Gorka and Steve Bannon. This is not just rhetoric. This is very real for people all over America. And I would suggest that we have to, that is not an outrageous overstatement. If you know what? In Germany, wait, Chris, in Germany, there are no statues and monuments of Nazi soldiers. Children do not go to schools named after Nazi generals. But in the United States of America, our children walk through parks, walk down streets, and go to schools named after generals of the Confederacy, folks who, if in present day, took up arms against the government, would be considered treasonous because they felt it was their right to own people that looked like me in this country because it benefited them economically. That's what this is about. And so there is no overstatement here. These are the facts.
And if we would like to, that's
what the Robert E. Lee said. That's what they were marching for.
A bunch of racists and neo-Nazis to get together. That was a local blogger who got a permit. This guy from Ohio cares about Robert E. Lee.
You're going to dismiss this?
Nobody from Ohio cares about Robert E. Lee.
Are you really going to dismiss this as though this is not bigger and more serious than just Charlottesville? Charlottesville is an egregious symptom of what is wrong with parts of all over America. I'm not jumping to conclusions, sir. I'm being factual, and you are dismissing it. And you know, perhaps if you would actually speak to the heart of these things, we could get to the bottom of some of it.
Ken, hold on a second. Simone, let's get a point of clarification. Ken, what are you disagreeing with exactly? Simone's argument is basically that, you know what white supremacists are about. You know what Robert E. Lee evokes. That's what they used for the basis for coming together. What is your point of disagreement exactly?
Right. Well, my point of disagreement is that that was an excuse to bring these groups together. The local blogger who got the permit to protest the removal of the Robert E. Lee statue then blew this up. That was an excuse Look at
And now
look at
someone's
even
dead.
how they got the permit. And can I finish, Simone? Will you just shut up for a minute and let me finish?
Pardon me,
Easy,
sir. You
Ken.
don't get to
Bless
tell me
America.
to shut up
Say-
on national
and
television.
so-
Hold on.
You,
And so then all
I'm
these
sorry.
all these
Under no
racists come in,
circumstances
all
do you
these
get to speak to me
neo-Nazis
in that matter.
come in
Ken.
from
You
all
should
over the
exhibit some
country.
decorum.
Ken,
and
stay
understand
civil
that
with how
you
you-
were
hold on,
trying
guys.
to
Both of you
defend
stop for a
and
second.
accuse
Simone.
white
Now we
supremacy
end up-
on this program.
Simone. Now we
and
end
under
up with
no
violence.
circumstances
Ken
will I
and
allow
Simone,
that
hold on a
happen.
second.
So you
need
can
to
shut
reset.
up.
You need to reset. Ken, you don't want to use language like that
Hey,
when
look,
you're talking to
Not
Simone.
talking
You
to
can
me, he
disagree,
doesn't.
but you don't talk
Hey,
like that on
Chris,
this show. You know better
I
than that,
keep
Ken.
getting interrupted.
I know,
keep
but
getting
Ken, we don't
interrupted.
tell people to
Eventually,
shut
I
up
gotta
on this
stand
show.
up for myself.
I know, but Ken, you can stand up for yourself
Then
and
how
still
do you
be
make
civil.
them
That's
stop
not how you
talking
are.
when they keep interrupting you?
You
Them,
let me do your job.
I'm
I'll give
sitting
you
right
both
here.
chances. No, but Simone, I apologize for that. We don't talk to people like that on this show. And Ken, I know you don't talk to people like that. And I know you don't mean to insult somebody like that on this show. Would you like to say that for yourself?
Of course not, but I can't just be walked over for over and over and over. Look, let's be really clear here that step one, you had a local blogger protesting the removal of a Confederate statue. That guy was also connected, it looks like, to these outside groups. That permit was an excuse to bring these people in. And they came in from all over the country, as the arrests show. They were arrested mostly outside. There was only one Virginian I know of arrested. All the others were from outside Virginia. This was a gathering of hate groups. That's what it was. And they can define themselves however they want. They're all outrageous, ridiculous. And this guy was essentially a domestic terrorist.
Right, but you
If you're
don't
killing
deny,
people because
but
of what
you're
you
not
believe,
disagreeing with the idea that Robert E. Lee is emblematic of a hatred that is of particular sensitivity and pain to the African American community. You don't deny that.
Of course I don't deny
All right,
that. Where
because
I start to
that's
have a
what started the
problem-
confusion. That's all. That's what started the confusion, and it needed a point of clarification.
Where I start to have a problem, Chris, is that when you want to go ahead and say someone like Steve Bannon buys in completely to all of this, and that's the advice President Trump is getting, that just goes way, way too far.
Then why
So that
wouldn't
doesn't
he?
mean-
Why wouldn't he
stands-
name the groups then, Ken? Help me understand
Well, look-
how you arrive at that conclusion.
Yeah, Noel, look, this president defies understanding on my part. So I fully expect, let me lay out my expectations for a president. I expect this week, as we've now gotten out of a weekend and into the week, I expect to see him making stronger statements like the vice president did. I expect to see that. I expect to see that progression, especially as they learn more facts from the ground, as we did around midnight.
But you don't need to know
Saturday
any
night,
more
when
about
we
this.
learned
And you
more
know,
about the driver.
yeah, but Ken, I got to tell you, the analogy to what
Hey, Chris,
the
look,
previous president
could he have
did.
said more? Of course he could.
Well, I mean,
so
but that's the
what
point. I mean,
wasn't-
it took you
so
11
what
minutes to
point
get to
wasn't
that
to
point.
equate them, Chris. The point wasn't to equate them, Chris. It was to point out the escalation in the language a president uses when you've got a
Right, but what
tragedy
I'm
like
saying
this. I
is
think
when
that's appropriate.
when there's this rush to draw equivalence and defense and protection because of what happened with Obama. I hear it on the show all the time, and there's plenty to criticize
no
the past
equivalence is
administration for.
appropriate.
But
Yeah,
what
no
happened with
equivalence
Dylan
is
Roof,
appropriate.
when you don't know what's going on, you say, we don't know what's going on, but we're going to get to the end of it. I get being measured. That's not
Right.
what happened here. He
Right.
had over a day. We knew what happened. We knew someone was dead. We knew who they had in custody. We knew who the groups were. There was no reason to offer anything vague as a way of being measured, Ken. That doesn't make sense logically.
I think, Chris, the most important thing you mentioned there was the equivalence. I think the thing that the president has to wipe off the board is the notion that there's any equivalence between these hate groups and anybody else he might have been referencing. And that is on him this week. He's going to have to do that. He's going to have to do it himself. I think that's critically important in a situation like this going forward. And that's on him. We all know that he operates somewhat
Chris.
independently, even of his own staff, and that's his burden as we start the week.
Simone, give me a last word.
Chris, again, I believe we need to hear from the President of the United States today. We need to hear him say the words white supremacy, KKK, neo-Nazis, and then we need actions to follow up with those words. We need him to reverse the policy change that the United States of America no longer is looking at white supremacists in our counterterrorism program.
Right.
He needs to remove the white supremacists from around to white supremacist sympathizers. That is Steve Bannon and Gorka. And I would posit that people in America clearly need to get a history of Cuccinelli on this program. Thank you.
All right, and look, let's just remember something else here. One of the things that you do when you see hate is you condemn it. The other thing that's just as important is to counter it. That's why we use civil discussion on this show. And I know you both want that when you're at your best. There is no need for anything other than that on this program.
Well, I'm still waiting for my apology from Mr. Cuccinelli for telling me to really shut up on national television.
And when you sweep in, and Chris, one of the problems with it,
if this isn't an apology, Mr. Cuccinelli, I'm not sure what else you have to say.
If people use them to smear others, like you've heard here during the discussion,
Ken, I hear you.
It makes it harder to have a civil discussion.
I hear you, but still.
I said he curated the platform
Let's focus
of
on
the
the evil
alt-right.
folks, the neo-Nazis and the
Sebastian
KKK
Gorka
and those folks.
literally said
Those
on
people need to
Breitbart
be
Daily.
condemned.
All right,
You
look,
have
I didn't
the
want to get
audio
us back in.
and said
I didn't
it's
want to
not
get
the
us
white
back into the
supremacist.
discussion. But what I was giving you a chance to do,
links.
Ken, was apologize for the language you used to Simone Sanders. Do you want to do that?
I don't think he does.
Let him answer for himself.
I'll
He's good at that.
apologize for shut up, and I'll accept her apology for interrupting
I don't have an
me
apology
repeatedly
for
and
you.
talking
All
over
right.
me and
I don't have an
misstating
apology
history.
for you.
Well,
Thank you
okay,
for having me
now we
today,
know.
Chris.
All right, let's leave
I don't
it
have
there.
one for you. Will
Civil
not get one.
discussion is always the appropriate counter
you.
to hate. Both of you, thank you for being on New Day. All right. You got to make that point. I know people get upset. I know Ken doesn't like being accused of not understanding the history of racism in this country. He's a very learned guy, and he fought a lot of those fights. But at the same time, you tell somebody to shut up, it's a line.
He
Can't
crossed
let him
it.
cross.
You can't do that.
So we had to do that. All right, now let's keep another part of this conversation going that matters just as much. What the president says matters. We all know that.